I know so many, particularly female supervisors and managers, who are taking medication so they can absorb more stress.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought about that because I was talking to some of my girlfriends and I was like, wow, like I didn't do that, which is probably why part of the reason it was so hard on me.
Yes.
But I just suffered it, and I don't know why I chose that instead of taking medication. But I have many friends who did, and then I kind of thought to myself, isn't it interesting that in many cases we will medicate ourselves to stress ourselves so we can tolerate more stress?
Hey there, my name's Ashley Church.
And I'm Erin West.
We were once newly promoted crime scene and latent print supervisors on mutual struggle buses as we both simultaneously tried to navigate through the challenges within our forensic units.
Now we run a business where we create tools and resources that we wish we had had to make these transitions easier. We like to talk about the experiences we've had in the forensic field, the good, the bad, and the ugly, in the hopes to create awareness around these issues and move the needle forward to create positive change in the forensic community.
So if you're a forensic professional, regardless of your years of experience, who's not afraid to dive into real, raw, and sometimes uncomfortable topics, you're in the right place.
This is the Forensics Unfiltered podcast.
We've got another guest interview from our virtual summit for you. Last September, we hosted a free 4-day event titled Forensic Supervisor Success Summit, designed to help you thrive in a forensic supervisory position by setting goals, optimizing resources and skills, and getting organized. 768 registrants from 38 states and 14 countries were able to learn from 28 speakers and listen to 32 presentations. It was so wildly successful that we plan on hosting another summit this year. But while we're preparing for the big event, we wanted to give you something to listen to while you wait. So every month this summer, we'll be featuring a presentation from the 2022 Forensic Supervisor Success Summit. On this bonus episode, we'll be kicking things off with a guest interview with Sean Henderson, titled Creating an Outstanding Unit Culture. Sean established Evidence Management Institute in partnership with Tracker Products. Evidence Management Institute offers training classes, online certifications, as well as auditing and consulting services. And if you love this episode, we know you'll love the other presentations too. The presentations featured on Forensics Unfiltered make up only 15% of the entire summit. You can get instant access to replays for all 32 presentations in the All Access Pass on gapscience.teachable.com. We'll include all of the links in the show notes, but again, you can go to gapscience.teachable.com and click on the All Access Pass. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy.
All right. Hi, guys. I'm Erin West with Gap Science, and we are so excited to have Alice White here with us today. So, hi. Before we dive into the topic at hand, which we're really, really excited to have you guys hear about, I'm going to give Alice a minute to tell us about her background in forensics and how she came to be a forensic supervisor over the course of her career.
Good morning, everyone. Well, I don't know what time of day you're watching this, but for me right now, it's Saturday morning. So I'll say good morning anyway. My name is Alice White, and I actually started my career in the state crime lab in Alaska. So my journey kind of goes from one side of the country to the other. I was born and raised in Maryland. I went to college and got a Bachelor of Science degree in biology. But of course, I graduated many moons ago. But in the transition of completing college, I actually transferred from St. Mary's College in Southern Maryland, which is where I started, to the University of Alaska, Anchorage, which is where I finished. So that was a big transition. So I finished college, and as many of you know, when you have a bachelor's degree in biology, your options are kind of limited. Mostly, you go on to graduate school and you get into research or medicine or something like that. And that wasn't on my agenda, mainly because I had my daughter while I was in college. So basically, I had to get a job. I started applying to every lab in town in order to find something that was full time with benefits and could pay the bills, basically. And through that process, out of sort of really nowhere, because at the time back in the late 1990s, no one was really talking about forensic science. There was lots of police shows, but there really wasn't anything about forensic science in my world, so I didn't really know anything about it. But I happened to land a trainee position with the state crime lab in Alaska. And in that position, I worked crime scenes across the state. So we only went out for homicide. So I literally cut my teeth as a crime scene investigator working homicides. And also, I was learning latent prints inside for the laboratory side of it. So about 4 years in and having a second baby, I was married at the time, we moved to the Las Vegas area. And I started so in Alaska, I was a latent print examiner who just happened to do crime scenes. When I first got to the Las Vegas Valley, I worked for Henderson Police Department, and I was a crime scene analyst who also did latents. So different title, but same role. And of course, in Henderson, the desert, it's hot. Alaska wasn't. It was a whole different array of experiences, we'll say. Whole different array of experiences. Plus, I had to work other types of scenes I wasn't used to. So, for instance, in Alaska, the majority of the scenes were homicides. When I got to the Las Vegas Valley, I was working suicides for the first time. And it was a very unexpected thing. And it's a different sort of mental reaction to that. It's a very eerie scene to work. I found that suicides were much eerier, like got under my skin a little bit more than homicides. I also had to work SIDS deaths. And that again was something I wasn't used to. And as well, when we would respond to a scene of an sudden infant death syndrome, the family would still be like in the house, like crying and wailing. And you're like
So
trying
hard.
to like, oh man. And that's not something I was used to having to deal with. When I was in Alaska, I didn't have to work autopsy. It wasn't part of my job at all. But I did have to work with the, when they were doing the autopsy, I had to be on standby. I had to disrobe the victims. I had to collect evidence and everything else. And again, something that I didn't realize I'd signed up for. So when, you have enough scenes that are just emotionally not quite what you were prepared for, because, you get your first job in forensics and you think, oh, this is the job. This is what this entails. Then you go to another agency and all of a sudden you have vastly different,
Very different.
Woo! And then you're like, oh, I see. Things are different here. And I realized I really loved the lab work. And I really loved getting sleep. So in Alaska, we got called out like every 2 months we went out to a scene. So maybe every 2 months I went without sleep for a few days. But in Henderson, my partner Maria and I, we did all the latents and mostly all the crime scenes. We had one other person that helped out, but really it was just the two of us. So we were on call constantly. And I would go to scene after scene after scene. I'd be 3-4 days, hardly any sleep. I was becoming dysfunctional. I ran a red light and like almost got into a really bad accident because I was exhausted. I would have dispatch on the phone with me the whole drive home in my ear so that I was safe to drive. And, this was in the early 2000s. So things were just like, I was like, oh man, this is not what I signed up for. We have way too much work and it was overwhelming. And I still had to do latents in the lab. So, you're exhausted and you're coming in and you're having, but this is water, by the way, just for the record.
I'm sure that there's many supervisors watching right now that are in this same journey.
I was like, let me just go back in the lab. Like, I will let go of the on-call pay. I will let go of the overtime. I don't want any of it because I had two small kids at home. So, and I would like come in at, 3 in the morning and fall asleep for 3 hours and they were up bouncing around the house. And, it was just like, no. So I hopped over to Las Vegas Metro Police Department and still, same pay, basically same title, but now just late print examiner and no crime scene responsibilities, which was fantastic. So I had, a regular schedule, a regular job. Like I just was a worker bee, to show up, do my job and go home. And those were stress-free days. But, that's never good enough. So what happened?
Yes. Then you decided, I'll go for supervisor.
So at the time, we were all in one section under one manager. And so he was a firearms examiner, was his history, and he managed footwear, tire track, latent prints, and firearms. And when myself and Vicky got hired on, we were the only two women in the unit, and we grew from 6 to 8 examiners. So that was in 2002. So when we got up to 8 examiners, then we moved buildings. We got into a new building, and they were going to hire more, but they were also like reclassifying all the job specs. So they're going through this huge reclassification of the job description titles because at the time we didn't hire trainees, and they wanted to start including trainees. So the lab is undergoing this massive upheaval as we, switch to ISO accreditation. We're moving into a new building. We're adding and changing everyone's job descriptions. But before they did that, they decided to open a manager position to segregate latents off from the rest of the comparative discipline. So they left Tori over the rest of it, and they pulled latents off to the side and created a new manager position. Mm-hmm. And then it became like I was the baby of the unit. So I had the least number of years experience. I was the youngest person in the unit at the time. And we didn't know what the future held for us. And we were very concerned about who was going to potentially come in from the outside. And so I was encouraged to go ahead and just put in for it to sort of keep some stability within the section. So I did, and I got it. So, that's how I landed where I am a super. That was a very long story.
All good.
But that's
so. And then how long were you responsible for supervising at Las Vegas?
So at that role, so I started in 2006, and I started in I think it was middle of the year 2006. And then I started my company at the end of 2006. So I became a manager over the units, and I became an independent business contract instructor the same year. And I did both while raising a family up until I retired. I retired from Metro, but not from this. In January 2018. So it was about 12 and a half years. I did both. I was hustling.
Many years. That is hustling for sure. So I know that I took one of your classes many years ago, and you had talked about kind of a story that kind of was the culmination of many years of burning the wick at all ends, where you finally made the decision where you're like, you know what, it's time, I'm going to go ahead and retire. And I think we have a lot of supervisors that are kind of sit that fence where they're like, when is it time? When is it finally time for me to go? I'm not really happy here. It's affecting my mental health. Like, how do I make the decision to go? So if you'd be willing to share, what kind of factors helped you make the decision where you're like, you know what, I'm going to go ahead and do Evolve Forensics full time and kind of step away from this supervisory role.
Right. So it was a confluence of several things that actually were going on at the time. So, of course, in law enforcement, you have an ever-changing, so it seems like for the lab, which we were civilian up through the lab director, so my boss was the lab director, that hierarchy tended to be quite stable, and change usually was very slow, right? So if someone retired, it was usually someone in the system, promotes up. You kind of know them. You already have relationships with these people. And there's more stability in the process within the structure. What I found was in the structure of the civilian laboratory. However, there was a person above them in the Las Vegas system who was a captain. And that position tended to rotate out rather quickly. And so that position, you had someone coming in who kind of just had to do their time. Oftentimes they had to because they would rotate them through each section of the department so that they would get experiences in all the various sections of the agency. We were a huge agency, and all of that was so they could go on and do the next thing, because they were going for promotions and other things in their future. But we didn't leave. We don't rotate. We don't go anywhere. So this is our life. But you have people coming in that this isn't their life. This is just a temporary stop on the way. So they come in with their own preconceived notions, with not necessarily understanding the rules. I actually had one of them say to me, "You guys in the lab, you're so rule driven." I was like,
There is a reason why.
right. So I was like, wow. So they didn't quite understand like how structured. I mean, you talk about paramilitary, you would think the policing side of it, the paramilitary side of it, they are, but only in certain situations. In the
Yep.
lab, we're that way all the time. Like we are
Yep.
very rule driven, policy procedure driven, because we have to be because of the court challenges. It's expert testimony is just different. And because of it being so different, we are much more, and accreditation requirements, all of that. Like we are way more OCD about that stuff. So I realized that certain personalities at that level I could manage. If they just let me do my job, I was fine because I know how to do my job. Just trust me to do my job. You're paying me really good money to do this job. But other personalities weren't quite so like they wanted to get into the middle of things and often could sometimes be somewhat destructive or disruptive to the process.
Yeah.
So my very first run as manager, my first couple years, we had someone who was very disruptive. I mean, it was really bad. And during that time, I survived it. I got through it. They left. They were eventually fired, but because of the way things go, they also got their job back and then left again. But never back in the lab. So as long as he stayed away from me, I was fine. And we had a series of captains that came in, nice people. They left me alone. Everyone was doing their job. They weren't very disruptive. And what happened is that we had a confluence of another captain who was a very nice person and meant well, but was, kind of stumbling into things they shouldn't have been a little bit. And I realized, I was like, that anxiety that I'm feeling is familiar. And I told myself, if things get to that point again, because I feel like I'm not being trusted to do my job for whatever reason, even if the first one, the intent was bad. This one, there was no malintent, but I could feel that coming back up again. And I was like, I remember those days. And I was very sick. Like I was so stressed out. I would go home crying at lunch. I mean, I was a mess during those days back when it first happened. Now I was feeling those same feelings again. I was like, I know these feelings, and it almost killed me the last time. I was like, I'm not doing this. So that was kind of bubbling in the background, and I could feel those things coming back up again. I was like, And then we had the Las Vegas shooting. So the big shooting in Las Vegas at the concert was on October 1st of 2017. So when that shooting happened, it's going to make me cry talking about it, but I was at home in bed. It was Sunday night. Chris and I had just gone to bed, and my daughter worked at the Luxor. So she worked at one of the restaurants that was open, almost all night at the Luxor. And the concert venue was right across the street from that. And I'm in bed, getting ready for bed. It's like 10:30 at night, and nothing is happening in the news cycle. Like it's not like my phone was blowing up because something was going on in the world like it does now. But I get a phone call, and my daughter is, upset, crying on the phone. She's like, "Mom, there's shooters on the strip. I'm at work, and there's people running in the building, and they're bloody, and they're running, and everyone is screaming, and there's shooters." So of course, I'm like 20 minutes down the road and like, holy shit, like what am I supposed to do with this? So I asked her, I'm like, well, where are you? Like, what are you doing right now? And she said, well, we're hiding in the storeroom. So the back of the store, they had a storage area that could be locked up. And I said, is it all locked up? Do you barricade the door? Like, whatever you need to do. She's like, yep, we're barricaded. She's like, but people are running and they're bloody. And I was like, how do you know they're running? Like my brain was just like, how do you see them if you're barricaded? Like I'm testing her to make sure she truly is barricaded.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she goes, I can see them on the camera. So they had a camera. I was like, okay. I said, just stay put. I said, I'm going to make some phone calls. Let me see what I can find out. So I get a hold of my lab director because I figure obviously the police have got to be responding. She's going to know something, right? And nothing's on the news. Nothing's, public at this point in time. And so I call and I find out a huge shooting had to do with the concert event. So they don't know how many shooters, many people dead on the scene, and they don't know how many people are running around with guns. And the shooter's still out and about. Like, we don't know anything about where he is or what he's doing. So I get a hold of my daughter and I'm communicating with her, and probably the most terrifying phone call of my life took place during that time. And she calls me and we're talking. And in the meantime, the security people were going through all the little restaurants, a little, little, like, it's like a food court basically. And they were going through all the food court area, collecting up all the workers, knocking on the store door, like getting them, announcing themselves and bringing them out. And she's like, Mom, security's here. And so I can kind of hear them muffling in the background. She's like, okay, they're going to take us down to the basement. So the casinos have huge underground basements where all like the employee cafeteria is, like all the employee facilities and all that are down underneath the building. And she said, they need us to follow them out to the basement area where they're collecting all the employees and any other people they can find to kind of isolate, get them secured down in the basement of the building. And she's like, she's starting to whisper. She's like, Mom, I have to go. Mom, they need us to hang up the phone. Mom, I have to let you go.
Yeah, awful.
I said, well, baby, I said, do what they tell you to do. I'm like, just keep your head down, listen, do what they tell you to do, but listen to what's going on around you. I was like, and text me as soon as you get down there, as soon as you get secured in that spot. And she's like, I will, Mom, I love you. I was like, oh, girl, I was a hot cake mess. Then Elaine, at some point, she texted me and said that they'd heard a bomb go off. So my kid is in the basement of a very large building and is hearing reports of a bomb going off. Now, that what happened is the people at the Luxor are obviously, everyone that works on the strip, they all kind of know each other, right? It's like its own little microcosm of the world of workers. So the people that work at the Luxor have friends that work at Mandalay Bay, and they're communicating with each other. Yeah. And what happened is people at Mandalay Bay heard a huge explosion and were texting their friends that a bomb had gone off at Mandalay Bay. But what it was the flashbang when they went into the suspect's room. So, but the bomb thing, I actually started
still terrifying. Heaving.
Yeah, I was literally dry heaving, like I couldn't stop.
Sure.
There was nothing in my stomach, but I was like I was hurling, and not like nothing was coming up. I was so stressed out. So obviously, that situation, it was what it was, and it turned out she was fine. But I had friends texting me. We had a friend in San Diego, her daughter was at the concert and had someone throw himself on top of her to shield her from gunfire, and he was killed. She was found hiding in a closet somewhere. One of our officers was shot in the back as he was like getting his friends and family off of the field. We had friends whose daughter was shot in the shoulder. We had another friend whose kid was shot in the spine. Like, it was like we were in the community that this affected. And then I had to show up for work the next day. Chris as well. Like Chris stayed at the coroner's office the next day helping carry bodies in. I kind of sat at work waiting to find out what they needed us for. And then on Tuesday, we went down to a small crew and I went down to the coroner's office and helped identify some of the victims, because the photos weren't working because it was a very high angle that the shots were coming in at. So you had to use fingerprints for a lot of them because photo ID wasn't going to work. So you had, work was getting kind of weird on me. We had this huge incident that affected us professionally and personally, like you couldn't get away from it. Like, it was like everywhere all at once. And then we had a case, an old homicide case from a few years ago, and they decided it was finally going to trial. And up until the shooting, this case was one of the worst crimes we'd had in Las Vegas. It was awful. And they decided to hire outside experts. And we knew that we were going to have a huge, difficult, challenging, and that they don't do evidentiary hearings often in Las Vegas, but what they do is they make you go through all the questions of an evidentiary hearing in front of the jury. And so we had to have this like weeks and weeks of preparatory time to get ready for this extremely big capital murder case on the heels of the shooting.
Everything going on with everything else.
everything. And I realized in that moment, so my son was born in 2000. It was 2017, end of 2017. Guess who was turning 18 in January of 2018?
What
And I was
fortuitous timing.
I was like, yeah, because, this whole time, again, I've got, my kids are grown pretty much at this point. My son's in his last year of high school. He's turning 18. He's about to graduate, and my business was still flourishing through all of this. I was teaching more than ever. I had more requests than I could handle. And as I went through the paces at work, I realized I was like, I don't have anything left for you. Like, I'm tapped out. And I need to let some things go here. And I enjoy teaching and I enjoy the traveling. And my husband, travels with me now. So I have a partner to go with to actually go experience. Because before I would teach and leave really fast. I would show up, teach, leave. I mean, that was it. I'd turn around as quickly as possible. But now we're at a point where, hey, he can come with me and the kids are older and we have a dog sitter and we can hang out in whatever city that or go see stuff. And as busy as my business is, and I am still work a ton of hours, it's because I choose it. And I don't have to constantly solve other people's problems. And, I still believe that if they could have given me just like a 6-month sabbatical, because as far as I could tell, no one wanted me to leave. Like, they were in shock. My staff cried when I told them. Like, it was a rough go there, because I had just 6 months prior told them, hey, I'm going to retire in about 5 years. We need to talk about who's going to be taking over. And then, like, literally a few months later, I said, oh, so not 5 years, in 6 weeks. Like, I gave
actually January. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. Not 5 years. In 6 weeks, I'm retired, because I made the decision in early December. And it was actually on our way back. So we went to San Diego for my birthday, and it was over Thanksgiving weekend. And because I just needed to like decompress. So with the trial had already taken place, we go down to San Diego and we were waiting on the verdict. So the verdict was due to come back right after we got back. And so as we're on vacation, I'm like relaxing, I'm unwinding a little bit, but I'm like deflating like a balloon. And we're driving home from San Diego. And every mile closer to Vegas, I was getting increasingly upset and then starting to cry and then just didn't want to do it anymore. I was like, I can't hold this line anymore. And that's actually the tipping point. And Chris looked at me and he's like, well, your business is doing really well. He's like, just retire, like, just do your business.
Yeah.
And I was like, it's funny, the tears like
I think I will.
went right back up.
Yeah.
So I said, well, I'm emotional right now. Let me sit on this a minute. Let me take a beat. Let me spend a week thinking about it. But that's when I realized my son is about to turn 18. He's about to graduate. My business is doing great. I can actually teach more variety of classes like this. I can make this work, like this. And I'm getting frustrated at work anyway, and I'm feeling overwhelmed. And I was like, and I realized I'm like, I got nothing left for it. And that's what I told him. I was like, I have nothing left. I can't solve your problems anymore. I'm tapped out. I have no emotional reserve. I have no creative reserve.
Yeah.
Like, there was just no space to even problem solve in a creative manner. And like I said, if they just give me 6 months off to recover from all of this, I probably wouldn't have left. I probably would have stayed. But they don't do that. That's not a thing.
Yeah.
Right. So
that is not a thing for sure. That's a great idea though, because I think a lot of supervisors really could use that time to decompress and they could come back fresh and renewed. But I'm sure when you made the decision, that kind of decision's never made lightly. So I'm certain there was a lot of fear involved in that, and finally making that decision, that commitment to leave. So when you did it, when you finally left and you're like, you know what, I'm gonna retire, I'm gonna work full time at teaching and training and all of that. When that transition was done, how different did that feel for your mental health, your anxiety, all of that?
So it was really kind of fascinating. So the decision, I didn't take it lightly, but initially it was a huge burden off. Like, I had this initial just like weight lifted. And it's not that I didn't know what to do with myself. So one of the things people have to consider is when they retire, like I had a business to run. So it's not like I had to come up with things to do. Like when my husband retired, he was kind of struggling because he went from being a law enforcement officer for many years to suddenly like not having any responsibilities. But for me, I had responsibilities. I had things to do. So it was very easy for me to just refocus my attention on that. So I wasn't like stepping off into a void. My friend's husband just retired from law enforcement and he's experiencing the stepping off into the void thing. I didn't have to worry about that. But if people are retiring and they don't know what they're going to do with themselves, I would just definitely have like a plan, whether it's hobbies or whatever you're going to get into, you got to have something to fill that time. I didn't have that concern because I already knew that my business was going to be it. So I went through this kind of period of elation, but then I went into a period and it's of frustration because I started reflecting back on some of the things that took place during my career and reflecting back on like, why were certain things so hard? And you sort of realize that in the moment, you don't understand, like, why is this so difficult? And when I compared my experiences to other managers in the unit, there seemed to be a clear divide between the male supervisors and the female supervisors and expectations and ability to affect change. Like, I feel like I was the longest serving manager there. I never made bad choices. Like I was always making good decisions. But if I offered up change because I wanted something, I thought it could be better a different way, I had to actually demonstrate. Like I had to go back and do a bunch of research and present all the data. I had to spend weeks preparing to give this idea and have all the ammunition in place, because if I didn't, what I'd already learned is I would be dismissed. Because it happened before. When I was first started, I would make suggestions and I knew it was the right path, but I would get written off and I would have to go do the research, come back to another meeting, and then present all the data, even though I already knew the data was there. I just didn't have it organized in a way that I could put it in someone's face. And then I realized how much time I spent doing that throughout my career. And I would watch male supervisors walk into a meeting, not prepared, no data, no nothing, and just give an idea. And everyone would be like, oh yeah, let's do that. So
it's so true.
So I went through this like period of anger. Like I was like, I could have done so much more if they hadn't forced me to waste my time doing all of that. Because I had to do all of that on top of being the tech lead, on top of being the manager, like on top of all the other responsibilities. And I was sort of mad about that for a little while. Like I went from elation to anger to, it's like the stages of grief. And then I just got to a place where I got over it. But it wasn't like that first 8, like I think it was coming down off the stress. It was like, you're running at this level for years. All 12 candles are burning in the wind. And then all of a sudden it's poof. And then all of a sudden you kind of do this for a little while. And then you're like, oh, okay, I'm all right. I'm over it. Like, whatever. Like, good on you. Next person can deal with it. I'm not going to worry about it. So, but it's
so true.
But it took me a hot minute, and it took me like 18 months to go through. So when you leave, it's not, I mean, I hope when people leave, they just do this and they walk away. I think I was so emotionally invested in my job that it wasn't that easy for me. I wished it had been that easy. So my greatest hope is that when you walk away, you just like throw all that out and it's done and it's gone.
You're like, bye.
But be prepared. I thought it would be that way. And it turned out I went through this for a while and then I hit my stride. It's going to be different depending on how you're wired, how, emotional, how you respond to things. Like so many things impact that final feeling as you walk away. But the one thing that has been consistent since the day I left is I have had no regrets.
Yay, no regrets. So for all of our supervisors out there watching, if they're kind of coming to that point where they do feel like, hey, I really am, I all of 12 of my wicks are burning. I'm really feeling, overwhelmed. I'm feeling, very anxious about going to work. I'm really riding that fence about deciding, should I retire? What can I change? Should I change jobs? Should I change departments? Should I step down? like all of those thoughts are going through their mind, do you have
Mhm.
any suggestions for them to kind of help them, make a decision, or, any suggestions for them at all to move forward with, whatever path they're going to choose?
Right, and it's gosh, so much of that depends on, like, is the situation temporary? Like, is it just like you're getting ready for accreditation and it's gonna be really rough for 6 months as you get prepared for accreditation? Or is it you've got a trainee and it's just sort of, painful as you train people? Or is it that you constantly have, let's say, trainees and you're constantly in training mode and you're so burnt out about it and there's no relief in sight?
Mm-hmm.
So, a lot of that depends on the work situation, or like for me, was it a captain that I knew they rotate out relatively quickly, so I'm not going to worry about it? Or are the feelings coming back in such a way that it's unmanageable? So I think a lot of things have to play into that, but most importantly, are you financially secure? So a lot of that decision is going to be based on your financial situation. I mean, at the end of the day, we work to support our families
Mm-hmm.
and ourselves. So, what can you do in your life to continue to maintain whatever life you want? You have to make those decisions sometimes financially. So, if it seems like no end in sight at your agency, but you still have to keep working, then perhaps another job, and then it depends on how far you're willing to move. So, I think there's
Mm-hmm.
a lot of moving parts that go into that. But if you are financially stable, if you can afford to retire, you literally, run all the numbers and it's going to be fine. My thing is some people don't retire because they're afraid to. And I
Yes.
would say don't be afraid. Every
Yes.
person that I know that financially was in a situation where they could leave, every time they leave, and my friend that used to work with me, she worked for me. She just retired earlier this year. When she finally retired in January, she could have retired 2 years ago, a year
Yep.
ago, easily. When she finally pulled the plug in January, one of the first things she said to me about 2 months into retirement, is she said, "I can't believe I waited this long. I could have done this a year
Yes.
ago."
There's so much of
Be-
that going on too. I mean, I do think there's this
yes,
this huge fear of stepping into the unknown and releasing this thing that you've dedicated so much of your life and time to. And we actually had a sheriff. He was a sheriff for a very long time, very beloved sheriff, and he was putting off retirement, putting off retirement. And then when he finally retired, when he came back, he said, like, just for events and stuff like that, he said that retirement, like, was like the Wizard of Oz, and his whole career was in black and white, and then when he retired, everything turned into color, and he didn't
oh
know
my
why
gosh,
he hadn't retired sooner. And it's so true. Like, I've heard so many stories about that. Like, once they
yeah,
finally step into retirement, they're like, wow. And the stress, and like, um we had a supervisor who was taking medication every night to be able to sleep because she was very, very stressed and anxious. And as soon as she
yes,
retired, all of that goes away. Like, people lose weight, and like all these amazing things that happen when they finally, get over that fear
yep.
and make that decision to step into retirement. So,
Right. And what's interesting, I'm glad you brought up the medication thing. I know so many, particularly female supervisors and managers,
mhm.
who are taking medication so they can absorb more stress.
Mhm.
And I thought about that because I was talking to some of my girlfriends and I was like, wow, like I didn't do that, which is probably why part of the reason it was so hard on me.
Yes.
But I just suffered it. And I don't know why I chose that instead of taking medication. But I have many friends who did. And then I kind of thought to myself, isn't it interesting that in many cases we will medicate ourselves to stress ourselves so we can tolerate more stress?
Mhm.
And our first response often isn't, you know what, I can't handle this, I'm going to do less. So, like, I don't know if that's like the people pleasing kind of side of things. It's like I will continue to sacrifice my body to do more And I'll take meds that will allow me to do more rather than say, you know what, this is my physical mental limits. And, we have to rearrange job structure here or something. That's often, very often the go-to response. And then, yeah, it makes sense that when you retire and all of a sudden you're like, wait a second,
I didn't even need any of this. It's so
yeah,
true.
What you needed were reasonable expectations.
Yes.
and the
Preach.
ability to set boundaries and not be
Yes.
punished for setting the boundaries, because women often get punished when they set a boundary, and that's
Yep.
kind of part of the difference in management. And so it bleeds into crazy ways.
Yep.
So
Completely
yeah, I appreciate
agree.
all of that.
Completely agree. So this has been amazing. Do you have any last thoughts for our supervisors out there watching?
So for many supervisors, and I kind of thought this way too, I viewed my position as a supervisor as a support person. So I really did. I mean, you're a leader, but you're also support. And one of the early mistakes that I made as a manager is, especially with new people coming in, because of just kind of how I'm wired, my employees' success became my success, and my employees' failures became my failures. So when I had an employee that wasn't performing well, it destroyed me. Like, it was very hard on me. Like, if I had a trainee that wasn't making it through the training program. And
Yes.
so it was this like synergy, this codependence, that their successes and failures were my personal successes and failures. That led to a lot of my burnout. And it wasn't until I started being able to grow up, I could say, and realize that I had a good, strong training program. It wasn't the training program. Like, if it was the training program, I would have been, and it modified as I went along, and I updated it and I updated it. But whenever someone wasn't performing well, I had a tendency to blame myself and look in myself for what I needed to do to fix. And I finally realized, in a way, it was a lack of confidence in my leadership ability and my management and my training program, and my performances. Like, I always took it as my fault for some reason. It just is what it is. Well, as I got further into my career, when I learned that, no, I'm actually a good manager, I am a good leader, and I have a really good training program that is affording them all the opportunities. Like, I've extended myself as far as I can, and it's been good. Like, other people are doing just fine. Like it's not the training program. And to allow other people to take responsibility for their contribution to that, and then if they couldn't make it, to understand that it wasn't me, because I'd done the work. And that their failures and success, as long as I am being very open with them about what they need to do, with giving them clear guidance, clear goals, clear expectations, and I couldn't have made it any clearer than what I had, is that I'd done my work. Now, granted, I had to make mistakes in order to get to that point, but the minute I was able to separate that and say, this part's yours and this part's mine, and I'll own mine, but you got to own yours, I will say that brought my stress level down quite a bit. And it's just that tremendous internal pressure we put on ourselves. And so I realized that a lot of it was self-induced, because I was too codependent, I guess I could say, with my success of my employees, and I had to detach that a bit. And I think, though, as a woman, that's kind of hard to do. So we need to be mindful, especially, of our tendency to be supportive, but sometimes too helpful in the process, and that we can even help ourselves with bringing some of that anxiety down if we learn to spin some things back onto people for their responsibilities. But I will tell you, it took me 10 years. So I was a supervisor, well, not quite 10 years. I would say 8 years. It took me 8 years to figure that out. And then I managed that for 7 years, but then things got too bad again. And I was like, okay, I'm out.
So great. I literally feel like we could talk about this stuff all day.
Right. Sorry. This is probably more than 15 minutes worth of material.
No, I love it. I love it. I like everything you're talking about. I'm like, ooh, and this and that and this. But yes,
I'm speaking your love language. I'm speaking your love language.
I love it. I feel all of these things. I think a lot of the people watching will also feel all of these things. So, but I so much appreciate your time today. Before we actually check off, why don't you tell everybody a little bit about Evolve Forensics, what you do and what they can find if they visit your website?
Oh, thank you. My company sort of morphed names a couple times, but it's been settled on Evolve Forensics for about the last 8 years. And it really is mostly training. So I do a lot of still very basic examiner training. I do on-site training. And then with COVID, I had to convert my entire business model over to online. So for 2 years, webinars live. So we're on camera, or not really on camera because I'm usually in my PJs, but you're live with me on my fancy microphone system here. And we go through and we do webinars. And then also now I'm back on-site training. I've picked up a little bit of casework here and there, not a lot because I'm just so busy with the training aspect of it, because that's what I love to do. And so if they go to Evolve Forensics, they'll see that I have one website, evolveforensics.com, which is the on-site training. And then I have, that leads you to a second website, learn.evolveforensics.com, which is all the webinars. And so I have classes that are already kind of on the book, so to speak, but we also do some customized training as well. So that's kind of what I do now. That's my shtick. And I get lots of emails from people to help with questions and, you know, random stuff. So I just sort of just a resource basically for a lot of folks just on the side. And then otherwise, my bread and butter is just through the training process.
Amazing. Amazing. So we will drop the link for her website below. So if you guys want to reach out to Alice or to check out any of our classes, she offers a lot of amazing training content for latent print examiners out there. So thank you so much for being with us today, Alice.
Oh, you're welcome.
And we hope you guys have a great rest of the time at the summit. Bye.
All right, we hope you enjoyed this bonus episode of the Forensics Unfiltered podcast. Just a reminder, if you want instant access to this guest interview and over 30 more presentations like it, get the All Access Pass at gapscience.teachable.com. The link is waiting for you in the show notes. Thank you so much for being here and listening to Forensics Unfiltered. If you liked this episode, would you do us a favor and leave a review letting us know specifically what you liked about this topic? It will only take a minute, but it will really help us plan future episodes so we can bring you more topics that you want to listen to. We'll be sure to provide any links from today's episode in our show notes on our website. Head to www.gapscience.com. Until next time, stay safe out there.